All my instincts told me that we could not continue as we were. I was deeply worried.
But as Margaret Thatcher and her cabinet contemplated exercises in damage limitation, they found themselves faced with perhaps their biggest hurdle yet. In order to ease bills, more money was needed to subsidise the new tax. But Nigel Lawson's Treasury refused to bail them out.
It may seem odd, but it does seem entirely consistent in that the Treasury said right from the beginning, if you do this, don't come back to us and ask us for more money when the going gets tough. And they stuck to that line.
At the end of the day, it became an argument between the Treasury, which didn't want to spend more central government money on local government, and those who wanted to reduce the impact of the community charge. And it was essentially the Treasury versus the rest.
Nigel Lawson had bitterly opposed the poll tax since its birth at Chequers 4.5 years earlier. Many of his predictions for it were realised. But despite the Chancellor's warnings and even his last-ditch attempt to withhold subsidies, the tax made it through.
I suspect as a politician, he saw that this was going to be very difficult to sell. I don't know why he didn't pursue it. I think if you're the Chancellor, you choose very carefully the grounds on which you have an argument with the Prime Minister.
Lawson chose the ground of sterling's entry into the exchange rate mechanism. On the 26th of October 1989, he became the first Chancellor in 30 years to resign. This was a significant moment in the poll tax story, and the spark for an obscure MP from Wales to mount his challenge. Sir Anthony Meyer's issue was Europe, but it was the slow breakup of Thatcher's core team that gave this stalking horse his moment.
It would have been impossible to launch a challenge had it not been that she was now vulnerable, partly on the grounds of 10 years is long enough, also on the grounds of her style of government, which was becoming increasingly authoritarian, and above all, of course, the poll tax, which was seen as a monstrous error of judgment.
There was a sense in which she was in the bunker. The poll tax symbolised her out-of-touchness, the increasing divisions over Europe. There was a feeling that if she carried on, they'd lose their seats. And what has become known as the stalking horse was really meant to be a warning to her. Watch it, try and modify the poll tax. And it wasn't the sense that they expected her to be defeated, but more, would she start listening?
One of the things that we learned during the campaign is that there were quite a lot of members, a rather significant number of members, on whom a lot of work had to be done to get them to vote for the Prime Minister.
The hard work paid off, and Thatcher defeated her challenger. But the Prime Minister appeared completely unaware of the blatant threat that Meyer represented.
Ladies and gentlemen, just a brief word. I'd like to say how very pleased I am with this result, and very pleased I am to have had the overwhelming support of my colleagues in the House.
Despite her victory, 60 votes had not gone Thatcher's way, and that meant that a high proportion of backbench MPs had voted against their leader.
That did make 1/6 of the party. Well, OK, you know, 5/6 of the party remained loyal to her. But among those who remained loyal to her, there were a certain number who came up to me. I mean, one came up to me and said, I voted for Margaret Thatcher, but I've told her this is the last time I shall do so.
Deputy Chief Whip Tristan Garrell-Jones had become more and more alarmed at the scale of discontent that existed within the party, driven by the issue of the poll tax. He was summoned to see the Prime Minister.
I think it's the longest one-on-one meeting that I ever had with Margaret Thatcher, actually. I mean, I was simply saying, look, I don't care tuppence about the actual merits or demerits of the policy. I'm simply speaking as the Deputy Chief Whip. The boys don't like this. They just don't like it. They think it's going to lose an election for us. They've been impacted pretty strongly by the sort of popular uprising against it, the campaign run by Labour local authorities. Sum total, they're scared.
Look, the truth of the matter is that we spent the whole of 1990 in Number 10 wondering in conversation over lunch and whenever we met, would there be another challenge to Margaret Thatcher this year? So that tells you that the threat had been registered. Whether it had been registered enough is another matter.
The net was closing in on the Prime Minister. Despite clear warnings from both inside and outside government, she refused to budge on the poll tax issue. Scotland was now in revolt, and all the indications were that England would soon follow suit. But Thatcher continued to stand firm.
She plainly had not understood the degree of unhappiness and worry about the community charge, amongst other issues, which existed on her backbenches. And it all went down to the fact that they could see an election getting ever closer. We were behind in the polls, and when they went out and talked to their voters, the issue which was the biggest source of complaint was the poll tax. You achieved that. To the outside world, she appeared to be absolutely unbending, unwilling to listen, unwilling to concede that there was anything wrong with the new system.
She just was not open to reason or argument or listening to anybody. I mean, if you met Margaret Thatcher, she'd give you the whole of her attention and talk at you. She wouldn't listen to what you had to say, but she did fasten her whole attention upon you. But she was absolutely impervious to argument, and this emerges from all the records of the Cabinet and so on. She just did not listen.
If you believe that what you're doing is correct in the circumstances and will be ultimately beneficial, and you have to go through pain and you have to endure it, what do? Well, I ask you, you know Margaret Thatcher's whole being. It wasn't to weakly and meekly concede. It was to grit your teeth, grin and bear it, endure and go through it. That's what she did.
As she dug in, Thatcher dug her political grave. 1990 was accelerating towards disaster. Middle England was demanding concessions, but the Prime Minister wasn't listening. That spring, the poll tax issue put Britain on news bulletins around the world. On the 31st of March, more than 100,000 people gathered at Trafalgar Square. What started as a peaceful and good-humoured demonstration soon escalated into a full-scale bloody riot. Over 400 arrests were made, and property damage was estimated at £400,000. Thatcher's response was uncompromising. As far as she was concerned, this was the work of dropouts and far-left anarchists.
A whole class of people, an underclass, if you will, had been dragged back into the ranks of responsible society and asked to become not just dependents, but citizens. The violent riots was there, and the left's response.
She certainly didn't see them in any way as representative of the vast majority of public opinion. She regarded the riots as a public order challenge. It was a challenge to the authority of her government and to the establishment and the state.
My best advice to people who wanted to change Margaret Thatcher's opinion was not to riot, set off bombs, fire bullets at people to try to kill them. That would absolutely confirm her in a resolve to see it through. So the Trafalgar Square riot was absolutely and utterly counterproductive.
Her indignation at the methods adopted by the far left overrode her understanding of how deep the actual opposition to the poll tax was. She failed to realise how deeply opposed many of her own people were to the poll tax, because they didn't go out on the streets and demonstrate and climb the gates in Downing Street. She thought the whole thing was a set-up by the far left, when of course the roots of it and the extent of it was far deeper and broader.